Welcome to the Connected Enterprise Podcast. This is Carl Lewis, your host from Vision33. And my guest today is Mitchell Lee from Vendavo. So Mitchell, welcome. And start us off by telling a little bit about yourself, your background, and about Vendavo.
Absolutely. And first, because we know each other, call me Mitch.
Okay, I'll do that.
If somebody calls me Mitchell, it's because we haven't spent enough time together. We haven't lifted one at the bar together yet. So we'll fix that soon.
All right.
So my background, Carl, my undergraduate degree has been chemical engineering. And so a lot of my starting off early days of my career working was in chemical industry related jobs. I did project engineering, plant engineering. I moved when I got my MBA done, I moved into the business side. A lot of that was with, one was a venture capital startup company that I did right out of school. Then I went to work for BASF, and that's where I really got into the business side. They were the ones that paid for me to go to school, moved into the business production side, where I was responsible for a small number of products with a small number of customers. And even with that simplicity, found that, as everyone does, running a business and running pricing and commercial processes is difficult. I had basically 6 products and 3 customers, and pricing was just one of the most tremendously difficult things that I ever had. From BASF, I moved to a company called Orica. They are number 1 or number 2 largest in the world in terms of mining services. That's what you say in the airport when you don't want to say they make explosives. That's not a fast way to get through security. When I was there, I picked up a business line. I was responsible for a $500 million business line for the North American business. And it was even simpler product line. I had one product, wet or dry, so not too many SKUs to chase. I had about a dozen customers, but because it was a commodity, most of the product was a commodity driven one, I was changing prices all the time. And so that meant I had to write defensive margin protecting contracts and terms and conditions, and then execute against them with precision, so I could do what I said I was going to do and try to retain some margin. And I took that business line from a net negative $10 million loss a month to a $50 million positive per year over the course of about 3 years. It was a lot of breaking contracts and getting out of stuff and renegotiating very defensively, but that was the starting point where we were to get to net positive. And so that's where I kind of really fell in love with the need for improvement in commercial processes and pricing in particular. And that's when I started working with Vendavo as a customer. I brought in Vendavo, I brought in all the pricing software vendors, picked Vendavo as part of a larger project where we were reinstalling SAP globally for our company. And Vendavo was the only thing that wasn't on SAP paper. That was everything else that was purchased was SAP paper. And I loved that so much that I eventually joined Vendavo. And today I'm the profit evangelist is what I say out loud. But I work on the sales and marketing side as well to make sure that we get the message out for folks to understand that this is very, very mature thinking and technology. McKinsey came out with the ideas of the pricing waterfall, how to manage your pricing 30 years ago. Yep. Harvard Business Review in the early 90s, there's a seminal article from McKinsey about 1 to 3% of your revenue is laying on the table if you just start managing your pricing. And Vendavo has the pricing software to follow that methodology, make things actionable, give you the context for decisions and driving results. So I've been with Vendavo for about 6 years now, and I'm just having a ton of fun helping people make bottom line differences. So Vendavo software is not like a cost savings or efficiency. Sure, you do that. It's more about raising that top line too, and all of that dropping to the bottom line as pure benefit.
Very important stuff. It's always amazing to me how some of the best ideas are still the ideas from when you and I were young. So
thank you, Carl. That was very kind. Yes.
Yeah. Well, tell me, when you look out now, I mean, you've got a lot of background, a lot of experience, and you're in a great industry, helping companies, something as important as pricing and being able to do it, fast, right? So they don't have to do a study every time they want to quote a customer.
Exactly.
What are some of the up and coming technologies? What's going on in your world with AI, machine learning, all of that stuff? How's it impacting? And what's going on?
Lots of companies are hearing the terms digitization and then digitalization. So digitization is getting your information available in the form of data, right? So it can sit on machines, sit on computers. Digitalization is changing your processes, your commercial processes is what we're talking about, but it also works for manufacturing processes, making them digital so that they ingest and then reflect back out information as data. And then with that foundation, you don't do that just to say, oh, now I have data. You do that to start making decisions with the data. This is where things like IoT for ingesting more information from physical process, for example, having enterprise data that is coming in from third parties, having more data, being able to handle that more cheaply than ever before. And now you can start talking about things that are going to be leveraged with the use of AI, with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on. Because now it's not, you mentioned the word exactly, it's not a study, it's not a project, it's a process that you do all the time. It's not when peeling back here, when I started at the company I was at before, when I had half of the company's revenue in my business line, the other guys had price lists that they changed once a year. And that was all they could manage because they had so many SKUs. It was too complicated. It was just too much work. And they didn't see the value in managing that because it was tough work and you had to do a lot of communication coordination. Now with processes digitalized, and then AI sitting on top of that to say, to serve you up context for decisions, now you can make that process agile. As you said, this is the great thing we've learned over 2020 is agility is not just a buzzword, it's a hygiene factor. You have to have that to survive. If you can't pivot quickly relative to what's going on with your markets upstream or downstream in your supply chain, you're going to be left by the side of the road very, very quickly. You're going to be stuck in the Suez Canal, like the barge we saw, the freighter we saw a few weeks ago.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's interesting. I mean, all of these, companies are doing exactly what you said. I see it all across from the smallest to the largest enterprise, so everybody is going through this, making everything digital process and advantage of it. What do you see as you guys are working with other companies are the biggest challenges that companies face when they're trying to go through this process of digitalization?
Closing the loop. That's the biggest challenge. So more data coming in, lots of propeller heads, smart people spending lots of time making observations. How do you turn that back into context for action for the people making decisions? So for what we talk about a lot to our customers is, and this is why we've made changes over the last couple of years to make some acquisitions for some companies in terms of some capabilities, specifically around CPQ, configure price quote programs, is that insight that gets developed is useless, worthless, unless it's put in the hands of people who can use it in the moment. So CPQ, for example, we take all of the AI-driven context for making decisions with pricing guidance levels and approval levels, so the seller is fully armed when they're ready to engage with the customer. That's made available to them in the moment when they're working with the customer or they're preparing a quote, having all that so that they can get an inquiry in the morning and before lunch, have a quote back to that customer. Speed is tremendously valuable. The faster you can get an answer back to a customer, the much more likely you are to have business with them as a result of that. So we see CPQ, for example, as a way to close that loop, get the information, that context for decisions in front of the users in a productive, profitable manner so that you can, and this is my process engineering talking, inputs, measurements, outputs, measurements, and then a feedback loop. You're tuning. Are you getting the output that you desired? You'll adjust your inputs accordingly. And so if you don't do that, then you're driving down the road, looking out the rear view mirror to see whether you're staying in your lanes or not. If you don't have that feedback loop to tell you what's going on.
Yeah, it's already happened and you don't know about it.
Exactly.
A friend of mine
It's
used
too
to
late
call
when you find
that
out.
by surprise. Yeah.
Yeah.
And seems, I think you're right, though, that, companies invest a lot in this whole process of digitalization, whether they're moving to the cloud, acquiring certain pieces of information, integrating data into one big master database. But it's kind of like the hardest question is, then what? Right.
Yeah. Then and it's not just the technology either. You will be the first folks to tell you that it's not just pieces. It's not stacking more pieces of software on the salesperson's laptop. This takes people and process. It takes some training. It takes some change management. It takes top-down leadership. It takes bottom line buy-in. But if you work all the edges, there's tremendous value on the table for folks to take advantage of.
Yeah, it's funny. The simplest process can make all of your data and all of your systems haywire if that process isn't good.
Yeah, you just do stupid things faster.
Exactly right. One of our consultants was recently telling me about a company that was packing in their warehouse, and they would bring all of the picked orders to a big square table where everybody worked and everything was kind of in the middle of the table, and they would, put the stuff in boxes and whatnot. Well, you had like 6 or 7 people working around that square table, all grabbing kind of out of the same central area. So you can think in your mind, that's a grab bag. That's not an order processing system. And all they did was simply turn that square table into one long table, right? So that nobody's things stayed in order along the way, and the process worked.
Yeah, if you had something to put in that box, you put it in the box. If you didn't, you let it go by for the next.
Let it go by.
Person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the processes that people put in place are really important, and it usually takes input. It seems like from a lot of people. You said it, from the leadership right on down, to set that process properly in place.
Absolutely.
We're all trying to forecast, what's the next technology thing that's really going to transform business. What do you think, outside of the immediate stuff that businesses are doing, kind of what's on the horizon that, that the tech heads are talking about, but we're not quite seeing it ready for prime time yet? What do you guys see out there?
I'm going to go back to AI in general. We work with a lot of companies, a lot of really big Fortune 500 companies, global Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 50 companies, that part of their budgeting process is earmarking tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars for a category that says AI. It's just, we're going to spend money on AI, and they approve that all the way up to the board level. That's great, because there's a ton of things that can be done with AI, but there's a practicality and pragmatic view of AI, of ML, of all of those technologies, in the sense of one of the most defined processes that we are all familiar with is driving down the road. There are rules of the road. The lanes are usually painted, highly mapped. We've got great maps that are digital and out there, and we are still not fully into AI in terms of trusting lots of vehicles to do completely automatic decision-making and interaction with other vehicles and so on. Running a business is a lot more complicated than driving down an interstate, a lot more complicated. What we work with our customers is to say, yes, AI is important, but from a pragmatic, practical sense, let's think about supervised AI. Let's think about, instead of black box where you throw stuff at it, you plug in all these data inputs from third parties or market information or your transactions, your product or customer information, and just hoping something comes out on the other end. You need to be able to query that decision-making process and test the questions and answers along the way, and then change it, make adjustments based on, the data absolutely is saying it's going to go left instead of right, but I'm introducing a new product line or setting up a new business in a new region that is not reflected in what that data model was looking at. So I'm going to create another tree, another branch to be taken care of for AI to drive it. So that supervised AI, we talk about the term centaur. something that Gary Kasparov defined when he was fighting Big Blue, the first time that he lost to Big Blue. He came back after he lost. He said, I think the very best combination of technology and people that know what they're doing is the centaur idea, in the sense of let the machine do what it's good at. Let it calculate bunches of cycles and distill things down and look for signals, but then serve up that information to somebody that has perspective that isn't necessarily in that data, and let them query and question and then decide. So the horse part of the centaur is the computer, and then the human brain on top is the business savvy of your average business person. And they shouldn't have to be AI specialists. They shouldn't have to be computer specialists. They just need to be business people that understand what is going on in their market. And that's that pragmatic approach of AI. So I think there's a good test for folks that we talk with when they say, I've got some earmarked money that's AI. Say, great, let's make that successful. Let's go get some of that money, get that budget. If you can, that helps you justify that spend that you need to do, this project that you need to do, this initiative that's going to happen. Let's make that successful. Let's not just make it a black box where it spits out things that you can't explain. That's not a good position to be in for explaining to somebody what happened. Well, I put it in this black box and it gave me back some answers and I followed it. So we did it, but it didn't work out. That's not a good place to be. That's not a career advancing step, right?
I like the phrase you used in there, supervised AI. And I think that's a comfortable feeling also, right? Because just like you said, we're not quite ready for cars that drive themselves, but we are kind of comfortable with supervising a car that can do some of those things.
Yeah.
And but that doesn't mean you want to sit in the back seat like the fellow last week in the news, right? Now,
that's
it's a little more comfortable than the rest of us.
That's not a productive effort. Yeah. He probably doesn't have a board to explain to when he cracks up that Tesla or goes to jail again to have another conversation with a judge.
Yeah, exactly. It may get worse for him. Well, hey, I ask all of our guests on the podcast to talk about communications, and in the perspective of how you're communicating today. And of course, the pandemic has done things to all of us. Here we are, on a Zoom call, which has become the lifeblood of so many of us for hours a day, it seems like. I think we're all ready for that to not be the case. But prior to all of that, in your professional life, how has it changed, right? And what do you use today to communicate with that's effective that you didn't use years ago?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the starting point is, yes, we were in the same boat that everybody else was, having to move from in-person meetings. We did a couple of phone calls. We really didn't do much in the way of video calls. I mean, that was available, but we didn't do a lot of that outside. And then shifting that to, nope, you couldn't meet with customers in person and you had to have a video call. You had to have a Zoom session with folks. That's gonna have some legs. It's gonna be maybe the first meeting or first couple of meetings, or in those instances where we have a lot of customers where there are people spread out all over the world. So instead of having their folks fly from North America and Europe to their headquarters in Southeast Asia, in Singapore, for example, that a lot of the folks that we work with are headquarters in Singapore, find a time zone that, somebody's going to be up late, somebody's going to be up early, but you can save a lot of money. That's something that's attractive to our customers. That's something that's attractive to us in terms of being more effective and more efficient. On the other side of that, though, there are some things you just are much more effective doing in person. So we have already had a few customers in very specific cases, in very specific controlled circumstances, ask us to come visit them on site. So we've met with customers personally, totally observing whatever the social distancing or CDC indications, or what their company rules were in terms of making sure everybody was acting appropriately and acting safely. They liked it. We like to be in person as much as possible. So I think there's going to be a balance of that. There's still going to be a lot of virtual stuff because we've gotten good at it. And I think folks that control purse strings are going to say, you know what, that travel budget probably needs to come off by a third at least, because I'm going to expect a third of your meetings to go virtual, the first third of your meetings to go virtual, for example. I expect there's going to be pressures there. I think controllers in general have been very happy with the reduced travel costs. That's been getting a lot of people through some tough times there.
And the reduced number of expense reports they have to process.
Oh, I'm really happy about that too. Gosh, haven't had to do an expense report in a long time. That was, I'm not sure I know how to do that. That's a good feeling.
That's so little of it in the last year. And I used to, it was just such a hassle.
Exactly.
Anybody who traveled, right? Yeah.
See, and to round it out, the communication, I think for most of folks that we deal with, email is still a critical communications point. It's our customers tend to be larger, more conservative. I am seeing more and more folks being willing to meet on Teams, and Teams video chats, for example. So there's this is that creeping edge of virtual meetings and everything certainly coming in. But I think email is going to be here for a long time. I think the predominance of important meetings wanting to be done by both parties in person is going to come back. But I think there's this legitimately a ripe space for virtual connections while you're kind of getting the legs underneath the situation for both parties.
Yeah, I think so. And especially for companies like yours and mine, there's when people engage with us, there are investments to be made. Yeah. And I think it's a great way to kind of qualify, do we want to make this investment, and getting to know one another and going through some of the basics before you start making those sorts of expenses to let's all get together and talk this through.
Precisely.
And, touring facilities and all of those types of things that are necessary at that point of an engagement. And I think, the video stuff has been great. I mean, one of the things I've been able to do is, for instance, interview people much easier, right, than ever before. And
people are used to it, right?
And from all over the world at all different time zones. And so I do think it's brought a level of efficiency to that part of our daily lives and business. In your own company, are you seeing people that are anxious to get back to the office?
Yeah, it's a mix.
Yeah. What do you think that mix is, and what plays into it? Do you think that the people that want to come back and the people that would just soon stay remote all the time?
It's kind of a mix of what are they doing and what's their inclination, right? Salespeople in general love to be in front of people. They are energized by that interaction, and that's a generalization for sure. But they are anxious to get back out in the field, not so much the office, but back out in personal meetings in the field. And if office visits are part of that, they're fine with that. A lot of people in the middle that are happy to say, let's plan a time when the team comes together at headquarters in Denver. Our business is located in Denver. We moved from California, Palo Alto area about 5 years ago. There's a few folks saying, we ought to start planning on, instead of all these Zoom meetings that we're having, we ought to plan on a few days every month that the whole team lands in Denver and we get that FaceTime, that really, really important time, much like the negotiation points that you mentioned a moment ago. When you get to the important stuff, it's a whole lot more productive. Zooms are efficient, but they're not necessarily effective. There's a lot of missing pieces there that my favorite analogy here is it's really hard to have a hallway conversation on a break during a Zoom call. And those hallway conversations are where you either bring somebody up to speed or you get up to speed or you advance the agenda on a way that isn't written down anywhere, isn't on anything. And that's what you miss with a Zoom call. That's why meeting in person, whether it's your own team or with the customer, are tremendously effective as opposed to just efficient.
You missed what I call the ad hoc conversations.
Right? Exactly.
That just happen, and brainstorming occurs and problems get solved. And so it's hard when you start scheduling things, everything becomes, well, what's the agenda? And then we stick to the agenda. So that sort of, iron sharpens iron doesn't happen.
Right? You're right. Exactly. Yeah.
Together. So I don't think we're fully cognizant of how much we've missed it yet. And it'll be a few months yet before we realize, wow, I didn't realize what I gave up, right, during all of that time. So I think some of us are more aware of it than others. And some of us are comfortable with a little more monastic lifestyle.
Yes, absolutely. There are many folks in many organizations, I'm sure, that are perfectly happy to have most of the interaction with emails or even a Slack channel or a Teams channel, and occasional Zoom check-ins. Different people have different levels of comfort with being on camera, and so there's all kinds of scales in there. But being in person, I think, takes a lot of those variations down. We're not so conscious of that light being on at the moment, or performing, or whatever that is, and it's more natural to be person. You get to read the person in whole. You get to read the room in whole, and all those things that we learn to do unconsciously in kindergarten come to play. None of us learned Zoom in kindergarten. That's not how we socialize.
Exactly. The working with you guys have customers, we have customers. What do you think is some of the most difficult thing for customers when they engage with technology companies?
For us, it's the number of people involved in the process. By process, I'll be really, really specific, because that'll help make the point. Pricing. Pricing. Everybody that's in business knows how to price, right? Because they've been in business, they've been selling things. If they're successful, they must have been pricing right. So when you start talking about, all right, let's document the process. Back in the day, you used to talk about process reengineering. Sticky notes on a big brown butcher paper on the wall. People would come by and say, "We do this here." No, we do it over here. Getting that defined in something as innocuous and well-known and standard operating procedure as pricing is surprisingly difficult, because there's so many people involved in the process of pricing. And so a lot of folks that we work with come to us excited about, this is great, this is fantastic, I can identify all these benefits, and there's all these case studies of companies that are in my vertical that I can serve up to my board, to my decision makers, to say this is something we need to do. And they have a very hard time politically navigating their organization relative to, how do you get the right folks on board? What's the story you tell them? What's the journey that they take to make a decision? And this is very convoluted, and the bigger the organization, the more convoluted, more important it is to know it. And most of this is, even in the most, so back to BASF, very structured. I think they still run a matrix organization where geographies are one reporting structure, business units are another reporting structure, and you have dotted line responsibilities, and it's all spelled out. What do you do for this person? What do you do for that person? And yet, decision-making authority, even when it's written down as specifically and detailed as you can imagine that was, is still very difficult. And that's for an organization. That's for an organization that its DNA is on organization. So there's a lot of companies that are struggling with, I want to do something. How do I make this decision? How do I raise this initiative to a priority where, one, people agree and it's funded, let's say, but two, how do I, again, that's the top folks, the top down, check that box.
Yeah.
How do you get that across the bottom up view too? Because you have to get the folks that are using the processes to do their job better, more effectively, more productively. They have to be on board too. They have to believe it too. So it's as much an emotional appeal as it is a logical appeal, in terms of you have to tell them the story that makes them excited about change. Change is scary, right? You have to make something that's very attractive on the other side of that change, you're going to be more successful, more productive, and your career will progress, because you can point at, and then you get to the logic, you can point at what these specifics are for your organization because these other organizations have done similar work in similar areas and just knocked the top off of out of the goals that they were going after.
Yeah, I've long believed that the business case is not just about ROI. There's a lot more.
You got to have that, but it's a lot more than that. Yes.
Yeah, I can see in large organizations for sure that it could be extremely complex because the number of stakeholders in a pricing, of all the inputs and all of the, value points, all of that could be tremendous. But even in a small organization, there's a level of complexity. There may be a lot fewer people, but they're still hard to find and still hard to get buy-in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So always that way for sure.
The areas of remit are difficult to navigate, even in the smallest organizations. Right. Does sales own the ability to price?
Yeah.
And sometimes the answer is yes, full stop, with no qualifications. Okay, that person better be across everything that the person that's responsible for the P&L understands. And that's why the pricing decisions really kind of have to start at that top level, the P&L ownership, whether that's a GM, a CFO, a CEO, COO, whatever you call it. That person has the span of control to say, yes, I have a throat to choke over here on costs. I have a throat to choke over here in terms of distribution, logistics, and I have a throat to choke over here with sales. And pricing is connected to all of those things because you have to have the right price for the right product for the right customer at the right time.
Yeah, exactly. Very much so. Well, give me an example of, Vendavo's in the technology area. You focus on, various parts of the business. What technology have you guys actually been introducing into your own company that's done some good things for you?
For clarity, the span that we work with is specifically what we call commercial excellence. Some areas that's a fairly well understood term, but even when it's fairly well understood, it can encompass a lot of things. We like to talk about it in terms of there's a gap between your CRM, whatever CRM you use on one side, and your ERP on the other side. So if folks don't think about it, if the P&L owner doesn't think about it, they just kind of assume, oh, we got CRM and then sales happens and then it's in ERP and we execute against it. We span that gap by getting from leads and engagements when a customer wants to buy something by what's the right product that they want, guided selling in our CPQ, having a conversation with them and where they answer questions. So even new salesmen can act with the authority and the confidence and the experience of a well-seasoned salesperson because they're taking them down the same questions that were learned. Having that connected to that context for pricing, the context for, is this profitable pricing, or do we need to override the approval structures because there's something that strategic about it that isn't built into the information? So technology that we brought into our company, we in late 19 started using our own software. In the technology field, they call this eating your own dog food.
Yep.
So we started using our own CPQ for our own salespeople to sell, among other things, our CPQ. The way that we develop, this is how we deliver accurate pricing for our salespeople to have conversations with our customers in the moment. And that has been a tremendous value. We can do all the, let's say, control and management administrative things in there. We keep updated prices in there. The salespeople never have to worry. They're not emailing spreadsheets around or calling the CFO on Friday afternoon at 4:30 and saying, hey, is that the latest price? Or all of those things go away. All the term sheets, any of the things that the sales folks need in terms of presenting a full quote is managed there in terms of making a quick turn on that quoting process. So I would say in general, for us as a company, using our own software is probably the most significant technology that we've applied. And we're using the AI in it. We're using it to make sure we get the right price, the right product at the right time for the right customer.
Sounds like a good thing. Well, Mitch, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been great to kind of talk about this and get your perspective on some things. And I hope maybe we'll check back with each other in the months ahead, since now we know each other. And
I like that.
And if I ever get to Denver, why, I'll look you up. So it's I get up that way every now and then. I think the last time we talked, I mentioned to you, I spent quite a number of years in Colorado. So I know it very, very well.
Fantastic.
Beautiful place.
So I look forward to connecting, Carl. Thanks very much for having me today.
You're welcome, man. To everyone else, we'll see you again on the Connected Enterprise Podcast. And until we do, stay connected.